Welcome to the Alex Salmond Show and to the second of our special programmes for Remembrance Day on the loss of HMT Lancastria. We're seeking to explain why the greatest naval disaster in British history has been barely remembered and hoping to make a contribution to redress that imbalance of history. Alex told the story of the Lancaster from Saint-Nazaire in Brittany, where the great ship was lost on June 17th, 1940.
Captain Sharp, in command of Lancastria, received an order from the Admiralty. It told him to load as many men as possible without regard to the limits laid down by maritime law. By 3 o'clock that afternoon, more than 6,000 people, exhausted soldiers, confused refugees, were crowded onto the ship, more than 3 times its established capacity limit. At that point, Captain Sharp made a fateful decision to stay at anchor and not to make a dash for home. He was understandably frightened that without a destroyer escort, his ship would be easy prey to U-boats in the English Channel.
In this week's show, we feature the quest for remembrance, and with the voices of the survivors and the relatives of those who perish, seek to explain why so many have battled against officialdom to have the sacrifice of their loved ones properly recognised by history. Alex takes up our story outside a care home in Uxbridge in Greater London.
Inevitably, as each month passes, there are fewer of the Lancastria survivors alive to give witness to what actually happened on that fateful day of June the 17th, 1940. Even since we've started filming, we have lost 97-year-old Reg Brown, a stalwart of Lancastria commemorations over the years. And therefore today, I'm privileged to be here in Uxbridge to interview Lancastria survivor, Royal Engineer Earnest Beesley, 101 years young.
I did go to Scotland a couple of times. In fact, they named a loch after me.
What, Loch Ernest?
Loch Ern.
Loch Ern. I'll remember that next time I'm here. Let's have a look at this. Ernest, can I take you back to when you were on board the Lancaster?
Yeah.
The bombs went down the funnel.
That's right.
The ship was packed to the gunwales with people. Were they all soldiers or were there civilians, refugees, other people?
Nearly all soldiers and nurses, and 1 or 2 or 3 there was ordinary people, and they some of them had children with them.
What do you think the key thing to survival was? Was it just your luck? Was it the fact you were a strong swimmer was to your advantage, of course?
Well, it was, yeah.
But some people would stay, some people would jump, people didn't know what to do.
On the ship, it's sinking, and I thought, well, the shore was about 2 miles away. So I thought, I'd better jump in and swim away. I could swim quite a bit, but I swam for about 20 minutes. Then this Royal Navy corvette come round, and he's heading straight for me, and I shouted, and he stood on the bow, and he slung a rubber raft out, and they went away. So I climbed into the rubber raft, and I'm sitting in there, and all these blokes covered in oil, they all come swimming up. About 6 of them got in with me, like, and the others was hanging on the sides. And I got cramp in my legs, and I had to stand up. I stood up, and they pushed me in the sea.
That was a bit much. You were on the raft first, so you got flung back in because they thought you were going to destabilise the raft,
right.
yes?
Well, so I started to swim towards the shore. I got so far away, and there was a rowing boat come from shore, and he's coming towards me, like, but he can't see me because he's got his back to me, and he comes up, and when he got a bit close, I shouted out, over here, and he looked round, and he seen me, and he come over, he said, can you row? I said, yeah. And then out of nowhere come this Royal Naval corvette, and they took us on board. they washed all the oil off of us. And then the other big liner that was there, the Ronsi, and this corvette we was on, he put us all on to the Ronsi, the other ship. And then we set sail for England. We land up in Plymouth, and we were isolated from other people because they didn't want to talk about what had happened.
You were under orders
Yeah.
not to talk about how the Lancastria had gone down.
That is true. And when I went home and talked to my parents about it, none of them heard anything about it because they were forbidden to put it in a British paper. But the Americans, they opened up with all the details, so everybody knew.
But for years afterwards, if you said to somebody, I was on the Lancastria, very few people would know.
They wouldn't know, no. No, they wouldn't, no.
Whereas if you'd said you were on the Titanic or on the Lusitania, everybody would know.
Well, the thing was, you see, they maintained that there was more people lost their lives on the Lancastria than the other two big ships.
Can I talk about your medals, sir? This array of medals here.
Well,
Because you served right through the war. I can see the King George medal. Yeah.
yeah, but you see, none of them was to do with the Lancaster. All of these was what happened to me after that.
Would you like to have a medal that signifies the
Do
Lancaster?
you know what? I was going to ask you that. Somebody told me that all the survivors in Scotland
Not just in
was
Scotland.
given a medal.
No, everybody was given one
That's what
who
he said.
applied.
Well,
And it just so happens, sir, that I have one with me. And with great pleasure, sir,
oh, that's
to you,
that's beautiful.
Earnest Beesley,
That's very
the
nice.
Royal Engineers.
Yeah,
It's
very.
my privilege to present
That
it
is
to you.
that is really nice. I certainly appreciate that. Yeah,
For your service, sir.
and I'm very pleased I'm here to talk to people about it.
And talking so well.
Yeah, oh, that was lovely. I'm so pleased.
It's a privilege. Now, Ernest, I've got one more thing. That's the Lancastria medal, but this is the quaich. The quaich's a Scottish thing. You put whiskey in the quaich. Only Scots
What's
whiskey.
it called?
A quaich. It means a loving cup. So the whiskey on the quaich, then you pass it round all your friends.
That's so lovely.
Only your best friends.
Yeah, that's very nice. I do appreciate all of that. I didn't think it would ever come to this.
Well, it has, and you're
And
still here.
I'd-
And a good amount of whiskey, and you'll be here for a few years
dear.
yet.
And I'll think of you when I'm drinking it.
The lack of recognition and acknowledgement in the subsequent years has left many survivors and relatives of victims feeling their sacrifice was worth less than the big heroic events of the Second World War. Jacqueline Tanner is one of a handful of people who was on the Lancastria and is still with us. She was just a little girl of 2.5 when the ship was attacked. Her parents, Clifford and Vera Tillier, were working in Belgium when they decided to evacuate. And I'm delighted to be joined by Jacqueline today. Welcome, Jacqueline, to the show. Tell me a bit about what you can remember. Well, you were the age of 2.5, what you've been told about what happened and how your parents managed to get themselves and you off the ship.
When it was torpedoed, they had to move. So they picked me up, and apparently I kept saying, baby here, baby here. So I was very lucky. My parents were strong swimmers. And I think they were in the water for quite a few hours. And people, or gentlemen, they gave Daddy a piece of wood to put me on so that my father could, you know, get better on that. And then when we got picked up on the Highlander, I was unconscious by then. So I'm told. So they put me in hot water, cold water, hot water, cold water, until I came round. And luckily I came round, and here I am.
You did, and of course you brought with you, Jacqueline, this is a sweater. This is what you were wrapped in when you were brought round.
That's right.
You still
the
have
seaman's sweater, yes.
that you've looked after.
And they wrapped me in that.
Wrapped you in that.
Yeah.
And of course, at the same time, something else you brought with us today, very beautiful, is your mum's watch.
Oh, mother's watch.
Which, as you told me, it stopped at 4:10 on that day, on the
That's
17th
right.
of June 1940.
That's right.
And you've got it, you've kept it, and just as it was.
Yes.
And you got to safety because we have a lovely picture of you with your family. This is the day after when you're back in Plymouth.
Yes, yes.
And here's you, Jacqueline, just a little 2.5 with your dad and your mum there
That's
at a
right.
family gathering. Must have been quite some relief for everybody to be
Well, I
back
think they
home.
were all on the Lancaster, those survivors there, yes.
How important, Jacqueline, has that been, that network been of people, the connections that you make in talking about what happened then? Because I know some people have found it quite difficult to talk about those events.
Every year we went to the reunions in France, which the French were very, very kind. They had a Lancastria, what do you call it, stone. And so we went every year.
And of course you received a medal in the ceremony at the Scottish Parliament.
Yes.
How was that day for you, and how did that feel?
Well, it was most unusual because I wasn't expecting it.
Must have been a special day. And of course we have a lovely picture of you at the age of, I think, about 12, where you were at the Cenotaph in London. We're very grateful and privileged, Jacqueline, that you've been able to join us today. And as a token of our appreciation, and I don't ever get to do this because it's not my name on it.
Oh.
But just as you received a medal from Alex, I'd like to present you with the Alex Salmond Show Quaich, which is Scarlet for Loving Cup. You can put in it whiskey we'd prefer, but Scotch whiskey, of course, we would prefer, but I think you may have something else in mind. But we'd love for you to have this from us to you. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank
Jacqueline.
you.
And so we have heard from the living testimony of Lancaster survivors how strange it was to survive one of the greatest naval disasters in history without anyone really knowing what had transpired and without any semblance of official recognition of the scale and enormity of what had taken place. I'm joined by author Brian Crabb, who will explain what was going on. Brian, welcome to the Alex Salmond Show.
Yes, ma'am.
And your book, The Forgotten Tragedy, the story of the sinking, one of the authoritative accounts of what happened to the Lancastria. Why did you title it The Forgotten Tragedy?
Well, because it was forgotten. There was 2 other tragedies afterwards, one in 1942, the Laconia, which indeed had the same captain.
Captain Sharp.
Captain Sharp. But that time he decided to go down with the ship. And the Ked of Ismail in 1944. And these 3 ships, nobody is mentioning them afterwards. I mean, it's very difficult to find any information on it.
Was it just the exigencies of wartime? We know from Churchill's own account that he said, look, there's been enough disastrous bad news for the day. That's why he kept it quiet. Could you understand that logic? Or?
Well, it was on the back of Dunkirk, which at the time he only expected to get 25,000 people back. And in fact, he got 1/3 That's a lot of people.
Now, Brian, in the course of your research, obviously you've met many Lancastrian families, both the families of those who died and the families of those who survived. How much does it mean to these people you've met to have acknowledgement of the extent of their loved one's sacrifice?
Massive. In every case, I've had loads of letters from survivors just thanking me for bringing their story to light, because they're just forgotten.
Well, Brian Crabb, both for your work and for what it's meant to the victims and for appearing on the Alex Salmond Show, I'm delighted to present you with the Quaich, Scots Gaelic Loving Cup. Listen, you know the drill, whiskey in the Quaich, and then round your close friends.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Only Scotch, mind. Last week, we saw how this confidential disaster is commemorated with such sensitivity by the people of Brittany. After the break, we shall hear how the Lancastria families of both victims and survivors finally achieved some recognition at home, perhaps appropriately in Scotland, where the ship was launched as the RMS Terrania in 1922. See you then.
Welcome back. As soon as the war was over, a Lancaster Survivors Association was formed to commemorate the loss. It ran for some 25 years. In 1981, the cudgels were taken up by the HMT Lancastria Association, which until 2010 ran an annual memorial service at St Catherine Cree Church in London and also organised visits to Saint-Nazaire. It was to this church that in 2005, the bell of the Lancastria with the ship's launch name the Tyrrhenia was returned after being left with a note at La Ball Cemetery and still remains at St Catherine Cree to this day. In all of this voluntary effort, what was lacking was any official recognition of the enormity of the disaster. We asked the Ministry of Defence if they'd be willing to be interviewed or send a statement. We're yet to hear from them. Here's a clip, though, from George Osborne, standing in for Prime Minister David Cameron at Prime Minister's Questions in 2015 on the 75th anniversary of the sinking of the Lancastria.
If I might, Mr. Speaker, at the end of this session, since he raises a military matter, it is the 75th anniversary of the sinking of the HMT Lancastria. It was the largest loss of British lives at sea in the history of this maritime nation. Some of the survivors are still alive today, and many, of course, mourn those who died. It was kept secret at the time for reasons of wartime secrecy, and I think it's appropriate today in this House of Commons to remember all those who died, those who survived, and the families who still mourn them.
However, to this day, MPs press for a more comprehensive government acknowledgement.
Today I'm wearing a special poppy pin from Poppy Scotland with the poppy and the ship's bell marking the loss of HMY Iolair, where at least 201 men perished of the 283 on board of Stornoway in the end of World War I. It is being suitably marked in Scotland, as it should. However, as we approach Remembrance Sunday, I wonder if the Leader of the House can offer a statement from the Ministry of Defence on the loss of the HMT Lancastria on the 17th of June 1940 of Saint-Nazaire in Brittany during World War II. With an estimated 4,000 dead, it's the largest single ship loss in UK maritime history, and it has yet never been properly recognised for relatives to remember their loved ones. Can the Leader of the House look to help this historic injustice?
Leader of the House.
Well, I completely sympathise with the honourable gentleman's desire to raise this issue here in the House. We do have a full debate on Tuesday on the centenary of the armistice, and that would be an appropriate time to be able to raise ships lost during the Second World War also. I'm sure that would be in order, and the honourable gentleman can raise his questions directly then.
In 2008, the relatively newly formed Lancastria Association of Scotland achieved a decisive breakthrough. They were successful in persuading the Scottish Government, under a certain Alex Salmond, to provide the official recognition which had been sought by so many for so long. The Scottish Parliament swept aside generations of MOD indifference and struck the Lancastria Medal for the families of victims and survivors. Some 375 have been struck over the years before the claims were formally closed in 2015. One of those attending the medal ceremony was Robert Cruikshank. In the last few days, speaking outside the Scottish Parliament, he relived the experience of that memorable day for the Lancastria families.
Rab, welcome to Alex Salmond Show.
Thank you, Alec.
Your grandfather, Alexander Cruikshanks, was lost in the Lancastria. Now, I'm interested, when you were a boy growing up, did the family speak about that at all? Explain how your grandfather died?
Yeah, my father rarely talked about the incident, the tragedy, for obvious reasons. But my mother gave me snippets of information, and that's the way I got information on the tragedy incident. Yeah.
We grew up 2 doors down from each other. You're a bit younger than me, of course, but and my father was in the Navy in the war. I wasn't aware at all that your grandfather had been among those lost in Lancastria. I wasn't even aware of the Lancastria as an incident because it had almost been written out of history.
Sure.
Did it occur to you when you found out about it? That's strange. I'd never heard of the Lancastria if it was such a huge disaster.
Yes, it did. I thought everybody would know about it, and even to this day, I thought more nobody knows about it really. It's quite shocking. I think the men deserve to be recognised at the highest level.
And did your mother ever discuss what had happened with your grandfather? How had the family been told at that time? Presumably they got a letter from the War Office saying that your man, your relative, your loved one has been lost. And was that it?
Yes, it was. It was just a letter saying missing in action and no other information. It was a very stark, brutally worded letter, in my opinion.
Now, of course, there was, as we now know, effectively a news blackout. What many of us can't understand is that was the exigencies of wartime, Britain fighting for its life, etc. You can almost understand why that decision was taken.
Yes.
What's more difficult to understand is why did that continue after the war? Why, when the danger was past, why wasn't it openly discussed then? Did you ever feel as a family, we really deserve to know what happened to our loved one?
Very much so. I can't understand to this day. I understand there's still some letters that are being withheld from the public. I think we deserve to know. I think we've got a right to know what happened to our relatives.
As I understand it, Alexander's body was never recovered.
No.
Is that what the family are led to believe as well?
It was never recovered. No, he jumped over. A witness saw him jumping overboard, but that was the last that was seen of him. The Germans strafed the waters continuously, so I don't know if he was shot in the water or if he drowned.
Well, I can say that the graves in Brittany are lovingly kept, and many of them on June the 17th, 1940 are marked known to God.
Yes.
And I would imagine that Alexander is among those who were lost then.
That's good to know.
Can I take you to the ceremony that occurred here in the Scots Parliament some 10 years ago?
Yes.
How did the family feel to after all these years, to finally get that medal signifying the loss of your grandfather?
We were delighted. It was great to get recognition for the sacrifice, because my dad were put into difficulties, financial difficulties. My dad had to come down from the Highlands and work in the Lowlands, and that's why he moved to Linlithgow and where he met my mum. So it was really appreciated that the Scottish Parliament did that.
And did you keep the medal to this day?
Yes, I've got it framed, along with your letter, Alec.
Thank you very much.
It's prized possession in my house.
Well, no more medals today, but what I can give you is the quaich.
Oh, that's fantastic.
Listen, you know the drill. I know you know the drill. You're from Livgay.
Aye.
So whiskey in the quaich and round family and friends.
Tell you what, I'll have that tonight. Thanks, Alec.
Thank you so much.
Much appreciated.
A disaster which touched the lives of so many inevitably leads to many coincidences. As Alex was filming outside the Scottish Parliament with Robert Cruikshank, he was approached by a French visitor from Saint-Nazaire who wanted to add his condolences. There is no doubt that history's hidden disaster touched the hearts of the people of Brittany.
Michel Leneur, you've come to visit the Scottish Parliament with your wife, and you're from Saint-Nazaire in Brittany. Tell me, what does the loss of the Lancastria mean to the people of Saint-Nazaire?
Je vis à Saint-Nazaire depuis plus de 60 ans.
I've been living in Saint-Nazaire for more than 60 years. The tragedy of the Lancastria was a disaster that the people from Saint-Nazaire also live through. It has been for them a really big memory, a terrible memory, to see that tragedy during the war, to see the dead people of the Lancastria on the beaches. It was very difficult for them and also for France.
Du Lancastria sur les plages, et c'était très dur pour eux, et donc c'est une très grande tragédie également pour la France.
Michelle, thank you very much, sir.
The 2008 medal ceremony at the Scottish Parliament was followed up in 2011 by a memorial built on the grounds of the Golden Jubilee Hospital in Clydebank, on the very site where the old draftsman office once stood off the Clyde shipyard, where the Lancastria was launched in 1922 as a Tyrrhenia. As ever in this story, the funds for that memorial were raised by the people, by the Lancastria Association of Scotland.
And it's here on the banks of the River Clyde that our story has its beginning and its end. This is where the Lancastria was born as a Tyrrhenia in 1922. The name was changed a few years later because American guests found it difficult to pronounce. And just a few yards from here is where the Lancastria families finally achieved their heart's desire in 2011 by having a memorial built to those who died. It's difficult not to contrast the open-hearted remembrance of the people of Brittany with the grudging admission of the authorities in these islands. And by denying remembrance, they risk two things. Firstly, if you don't remember war with all its sacrifice and casualties, then you run the risk of repeating the mistake. And secondly, without remembrance, families cannot have finality for the loss of their loved ones. The Lancastria families were denied both. And in 2011, when a Requiem for the Lancastria finally arrived, it was a people's Requiem. Perhaps Robert Louis Stevenson said it best. Under the wide and starry sky, dig the grave and let me lie. Glad did I live and gladly die, and I lay me down with a will. This be the verse you grave for me. Here he lies where he longed to be. Home as a sailor, home from the sea, and a hunter, home from the hill.